All right. Well, thanks for joining here ahead of time. We are going to get started because the time right now is 7 o'clock Eastern time. So I'd like to reward people who are here on time because I know you've come here to get a lot of value. So we're going to get started right now. Thanks so much for answering this poll. Just helps me understand a little bit where you are right now. And thanks for also putting your comments in the chat box. Really appreciate it. So here's how we're going to do these things. I want to make sure that when you come here, you really have your goals met. You really have achieved what you wanted to achieve. And we'll talk a little bit about this in just a few minutes. But I want to make sure that we are in that learning mode. Now, you've probably heard of a concept of a comfort zone. And I'm sure, especially if you've been to some of our seminars, you've probably heard me talk about this, that you really can't learn if you stay way too comfortable. You have no reason or no desire, perhaps, no motivation sometimes to learn. So we need to make sure that we get outside of our comfort zone and we get to what's called a learning zone. Now, by the way, if you do find yourself in a panic zone at any point throughout this class, just if, for example, if I give you something really challenging and you don't really know what to do, just try your best. Just try to take some small steps, and eventually we're going to get to that answer. And if you really, really don't know what to do, just put things in the chat box and I'm going to help you. So let's get started, especially while we're waiting for some more people to join us who are still perhaps working out some technical kinks. I'd like to give you a question to try. I'm going to give you just a little bit of time for that question, maybe like 30 seconds. It's going to be a problem-solving question. The kind of question that you might see on the GMAT. There's a question, there are 5 answer choices, and then I'm going to ask you what is, in your opinion, the right answer. So here's the question. I'm going to give you about 30 seconds. All right. Well, this wasn't super hard. As you could see, 80% of people chose an answer C. Let's actually check what is the right answer. Drum roll, please. Yes, it is C. So if you didn't get this question right, don't worry. You probably have not done this type of math for a while. But just to give you an idea of how you can do this question is essentially you just need to remember 2 things from high school. Thing number 1, what is an exponent? 2 to the power of 2 is simply 2 times 2, and 3 to the power of 3 is simply 3 times 3 times 3. So 3 multiplied onto itself 3 times. You just also need to know how to add and multiply. And if you were to multiply all of these numbers and add them up, you're going to get 32. And if you were to multiply 2 onto itself, you will realize that once you do that 5 times, you're going to get to 32. So that's all that you need to know in order to do this question. So congratulations if you've gotten this question right. I feel like some of you are still in a comfort zone, perhaps. So why don't we do one more question? Let me give you another question. That question is going to look pretty much exactly like this question. The one thing I'm going to ask you to do, I know we're all in front of our computers right now. Please do not use a calculator, and please do not try to Google that question. I wrote this question, so you probably won't find it on the internet, but please do not try to use any sort of Excel spreadsheet or calculator. That's not what you're going to be able to use on the GMAT. So here's another question. I'm going to give you exactly 1 minute to think about that question. All right, so it has been a minute. If you haven't chosen an answer yet, then I'm going to give you 10 more seconds. Just randomly guess if you don't know, but please choose an answer so that we can have a discussion about how to do this question. All right, I am going to now end the poll. And I'm going to share the results with you. So it looks like most people chose D. We are actually going to find out in a moment if that is the right answer, but also almost the same number of people chose C, and we also had at least one person choose A, B, or E. So it looks like a slightly difficult question, and of course it was, and I hope that you did not use the calculator when you were doing this question. Because if you try to do that question the same way we've done an earlier question, so for example, if you were to actually calculate 14 to the 4 and 15 to the 5 and 16 to the 6, you absolutely can get the right answer. You can add these up, and all you need to know is what is an exponent and how to add and multiply, and that's really it. But then I think what you're going to realize very quickly, and the answer, by the way, is D, that this method is going to take an enormous amount of time if you do not have a calculator, and you don't on the GMAT. So we need a better approach. The way that we've done things in high school, that theory way, that is still the way that the official guide is going to explain questions, is not what is going to be very useful on the GMAT. We probably need to learn some strategies. So let's talk about the strategies that we could use here. The strategy that is going to be quite helpful on this question is what's called the units digit strategy. We're going to actually talk about what is a units digit and how it works and why it's actually called the units digit. But how does the strategy work? Well, it all boils down to the simple fact that if you're ever doing a long multiplication or long division or any sort of a long math on the GMAT, you are definitely not doing the question efficiently. But there's one thing of actually doing the math and another thing as understanding how the math works. So if I'm going to try to understand how the long multiplication works, I remember the process. We always start from the last digit that actually happens to be called the units digit. That last digit is going to be the first operation we're going to do. So what we're going to do is we're going to multiply the 6 and the 7, and we will get 42. Now, you probably remember then that we would carry over the 4 to the next digit, that, by the way, is called the tens digit. The 2 is going to stay where it is, and we're going to keep doing this until we get the answer. Now, what is interesting is no matter what we do with the other numbers, with the other digits, the 2 at the end is never going to change so long as we didn't have any decimal numbers here. So we're going to use this strategy to help us answer this question. The strategy works really well when we're trying to multiply or add numbers together. In this specific question, we just have addition and multiplication. Remember, an exponent is just simply a multiplication. So let's deal with the 14 first. Well, actually, what I'm going to try to do is I will see if I can notice any sort of a pattern. What I would notice is 14 to the power of 1 is, of course, simply just 14. And because I just care about the last digit, I know it ends in a 4. I also know that if I were to square 14, I would get two numbers that both end in a 4. And if I were to multiply them, I know 4 times 4 is 16. I'm going to carry over that 1, so I don't care about it. I know that 14 squared ends in a 6. Now, if I keep going, I know I multiply that by another number that ends in a 4. 6 times 4 is 24. Again, don't worry about the 2. I just have 4 at the end. Let's do one more step so that we can actually get to 14 to the 4. Now, 14 to the 4 is now, again, we're taking 14 to the power of 3 and multiply it by another number that ends in a 4. So we're going to get a number that ends again in a 6. So what we've just discovered is that 14 to the power of 4 actually would end in a 6. I don't know what that number is. Hopefully, I don't need to find that out. but I do know that that number ends in a 6. Now, can anybody tell me in the chat box, what would 15 to the power of 5 end in? What would be that units digit, or the digit at the end of 15 to the power of 5? Okay, well, that's awesome. Yes, you're absolutely right. It is going to be 5, simply because 5 times 5 is 25. And if we keep multiplying that by 5, we're always going to get a 5 at the end. How about a 6? Does anybody want to share what will we get if we multiply 16 to the power of 6? Yeah, again, yeah, you're absolutely right. It is going to be 6 again, because 6 times 6 is 36. All right. So we found the units digit of these 3 numbers. And remember, this strategy works for addition as well. So if we were to now line them up and find what 6 plus 5 plus 6 is going to be, these are all going to be the units digits of these 3 numbers, we're going to realize that all these 3 numbers together are going to be 17. Again, don't worry about the 1. This number ends in a 7. How many answer choices end in a 7? Only 1. And we are officially done with this question. Notice how we found the answer while doing much less math. And of course, one of the things you're going to discover that we'll talk about all throughout this workshop is if you're doing a lot of math, the chance of you making a math mistake rises exponentially. So do less math, and there's going to be less chance of you making a mistake. So very little math. But what if you don't even have time to do this math? What if you don't have 2 minutes? What if you have 30 seconds? Is there any way to try to guess an answer while doing as little math to almost no math as possible? But the majority of the questions, there will be that way. So let's talk about that way. Let's call it the mastery way, which is really you beginning to think like the people who are creating the test, or like the people who have been studying and have learned these strategies, have been practicing a lot, right? So this is the kind of way that we teach, in addition to strategies, that we would teach in our class, in the mastery class. So here's what I would invite you to notice, is that if you look at the answer choices, I don't know if you actually looked at the answer choice when I asked you to do this question, but one of the things you might have noticed is that the answer choices are far apart. That is an important insight, because what the GMAT might actually expect us to do is to try to estimate that number without doing the calculation. If we just estimate the number, we could potentially try to get to the right answer. However, there's a little bit of a problem here. And that problem is I was given 2 answer choices that are very close to each other. That would unfortunately throw many people off when they're trying to do the estimation. And they'll immediately revert back to something a little more complicated. Now, estimation is a strategy that would actually work really well on this question, because it is very easy to estimate 16 to the power of 6 if you're familiar with your powers of 2. You can literally do it within about 7 seconds in your head if you've been practicing. So you can very, very quickly understand that the answer is indeed going to be C or D. Or even without doing that calculation, you can realize, well, that's what the GMAT wants me to get into. The GMAT wants me to get into this discussion about C or D. So even if I do the estimation, I probably won't find the right answer. So the question is, how do I break the tie between C and D? If I'm pretty confident based on my analysis that C or D is the right answer, what would be a good way to break that tie? Now, some people are saying, let's go and calculate it. And of course, that is not going to be a good way to break the tie, just because it is going to require us to, again, spend a lot of time. So what's another way? Yeah, you're absolutely right. What we can do is figure out whether the answer is going to be even or odd. And again, that's going to come from noticing that C is even and D is odd. If we look at our original question, we would notice that we have an even and an even number, as well as an odd number in the middle. So the answer has to be odd. D is odd. That is the right answer. And we can spend literally just 30 seconds of doing this question. Again, notice how much math have we done here. Very, very, very little math. So if you are thinking of getting to very high scores on the GMAT, that is the way that you should be comfortable with. You should also be comfortable taking this leap of faith and having a little bit of a trust in what you're doing on the GMAT. Don't worry, you can absolutely get to that level. And we'll talk about how. Here's actually what we're going to talk about today. We'll talk about what everybody should know before they begin to study. We'll also talk about a step in the study process that most people overlook that actually costs them a good score. We'll of course talk about the important quant concepts. This is a math class. We're also going to talk about strategies, not just the concepts from high school. Some things you have not learned in high school, we'll talk about that as well. Some of the things you can use right away. Now, as we're all studying at home with this global pandemic, I want to make sure that you have the resources to help you study at home. So we'll talk about that as well. And then at the end, we have a very special guest, J.D. Clark from the Ivey Business School at the University of Western Ontario, one of the best schools in Canada, certainly one of the most competitive schools as well, who's going to share with you some of the tips of how you can apply to a competitive school successfully and secure your application, hopefully even with a scholarship. So make sure that you stay here till the end because you're going to hear from JD in about an hour and 20 minutes. And going back to that idea of getting the most out of this class, what I'd like to invite you to think just for a moment is what's most important to you right now when it comes to preparing for the GMAT. You came here to this class and the weather outside is probably nice wherever you are. It is summer in the Northern Hemisphere. So what is most important to you right now? And as you're thinking about what's most important to you when it comes to preparing for the GMAT, I want you to also think about, why is it so important to you? Like, why is that thing that you thought about is so important to you when it comes to preparing for the GMAT? What are you trying to do with it? What's it going to give you? How your career is going to be different? How your life is going to be different? Maybe you're going to make more money. Maybe you're going to have a career that you really love. Or maybe you're going to have an early retirement. Or maybe you're going to be able to switch your career. So really think about what's it going to actually do to you. And then I think what you're going to realize is that as we go through this seminar today, we're going to focus on what's really important for you. And you might be surprised to find, as we go through this information, how it relates so closely to what's really important to you. And that's really what we want to focus on for the rest of our seminar today. And I want to begin our discussion by really having a very, very brief overview of what to expect on the GMAT. Some of you mentioned that you are just beginning. Well, you probably know that the quant section is just one section on the GMAT. There are 4 other sections. If you were to take the exam online, they're actually going to be 3 sections in total. Quant is going to be one of them. So let's actually talk a little bit about the difference between the regular GMAT and the online GMAT. I'm going to give you a very, very quick summary. You can find all of this information on the MBA.com website. The main difference between the regular exam and the online exam is, of course, that you take the online exam at home. You can take this exam until July 17th, and you can now use a physical whiteboard. There's certain limitations on what exactly that whiteboard is going to look like. So you can take your notes. It's essentially a small, kind of a little bit of a legal size, white dry erasable board with which you can write with a dry erasable marker. It's a slightly cheaper exam. And the most important thing for you is that if you do take that exam, you will then have to decide, or you could decide, whether to send it to business schools. It does not go on your record for the regular GMAT. As you probably know, the regular exam has a limitation that you can take this exam only 8 times in your lifetime. Please do not try to get close to that limit. But the online exam does not contribute to that limit. So you can go and take it. Unfortunately, you could take it only once. And then you can decide if you want to use it, you can send it to the business schools. If you don't want to use it, you don't have to send it to the business schools. We've done a seminar about the online exam. You can find it on our YouTube channel. It was approximately an hour seminar. We'll actually send you a link to our YouTube channel, and you can subscribe. We're posting a lot of these workshops and seminars and questions on our YouTube channel. Now, in case you're wondering about the structure of the exam, there is some flexibility in how you can take the exam and what order of the sections. These are the 3 section orders on the regular exam. The online exams follows option 3 with some modifications. So you are going to have to start from the quantitative reasoning section. You are then going to do the verbal reasoning section, then a very short 5-minute break, and then the integrated reasoning section. There will be a check-in process at the beginning, which is going to take approximately probably about 15 minutes. So you need to be prepared to be there at the exam for about 3 hours. Now, what I'd like to talk about next is how does the math section really fit within this whole experience, since today's class is all about math. And I want to maybe ask you a really quick question. And I want to ask you to answer this question in your head. Is the math on the GMAT hard? Is it really hard? And if it is hard, why is it hard? So try to answer this question in your head. And if you would like to share this with us in the chat box, then please feel free. If you have any questions, also please put them in the Q&A box. We will make sure we address all of your questions at the end of our seminar. So please just keep adding your questions in the chat box or in the Q&A. And if these questions are not the questions about the question we're doing right now, then we will absolutely make sure that we answer them at the end. So as you're thinking about that question, whether math is hard, I'd like to tell you a little bit about me, just so that you know who is this guy who is now sharing these GMAT strategies with me. So my name is Sergey, and I'm a senior instructor with AdmitMaster. I have 3 university degrees. I have a Bachelor of Physics, a Master of Mathematics, as well as an MBA. I have scored really well on the GMAT. I scored 750. This was my first and only attempt on the GMAT, and I have been teaching the GMAT right now for about 10 years. I love the GMAT. It's a challenge, and I love these challenges that require you to demonstrate some of the advanced skills. So after I fell in love with the GMAT, I also fell in love with some of the other sports. I consider GMAT somewhat of a mental sport. In the summer, I love sailing. I go and sail a boat, usually. And in the winter, when I live in Canada, so 10 months a year, I snowboard. And the 2 months a year, I usually go sailing. And yes, the GMAT is one of my passions. I do work with a lot of very smart people. This is another passion of mine. This is one of the reasons why I continue doing this work. Both people whom I meet as our clients, as well as people who come and work for us or teach for us, or people who are our partners from schools and from different organizations. And one thing that I wanted to share with you is that this workshop contains a lot of information that we've summarized based on the experience from many of our instructors. If you combine the years of experience that everybody who contributed to this workshop has, it would be about 70 years of teaching the GMAT. So as you can imagine, there could be a lot of insights you can get after teaching the GMAT for 70 years. And of course, it wasn't just one person, but it was about 5 people who in combination taught for over 70 years. And that's what we're gonna do over the next another hour and a bit. I just wanted to show you really quickly my score report also, just so that you know that everything's legit. I'm showing this report to you not to impress you, it impresses me. I think it's really cool that I was able to pull this off. That score very high on quant and also very high on verbal. Now, I do have my MBA, so you might be wondering, why am I teaching the GMAT? Shouldn't I be working for a very large company? Well, I did. This is what I've done. As soon as I graduated, I worked for a very large company for about 10 years, and now I'm retired. So this is my idea of retirement. Sorry, wrong picture? Yes, that's the right picture. So this is my idea of retirement, teaching the GMAT, connecting with people. So I'm really grateful that you've come here to this workshop to learn these strategies. And I'm sure that you also didn't come here to learn just about me. If I were to mind read a little bit, I can see you, but I can really feel you on the other side of the screen. I'm thinking that you might be maybe wondering, first of all, can I get a score of 700 or more? And most importantly, how do I do this? Right, so we'll make sure we answer these questions by the end of our workshop. And I want to start unveiling things for you by sharing a very big GMAT secret. So it is a secret that was actually shared with us and with me and a few other people who work in the test preparation industry by the GMAT, by the organization that creates the test. There's a conference to which we go every year. It's a very small, very intimate conference, usually about just 15 to 20 people all across South and North America from some of the companies that GMAT recognizes do a really good job preparing people for the GMAT. And there are a few small tips and tricks that I'm going to share with you, but here's one that actually stuns a lot of people, is that the theory that's tested on the GMAT, the concepts that are tested on the GMAT are overwhelmingly from a secondary school. So if you've ever heard the fact that, well, the GMAT doesn't really test anything from the university, that's absolutely true. You may have also heard that the GMAT tests mostly things from high school. Well, that's actually not true. Mostly it's secondary school. It's people who say in high school just saying it so that we can all feel better. It is really all from, the majority is from secondary school. Notice how it's elementary algebra, some really basic arithmetic, properties of numbers, some very, very common geometry concepts. Some of the things that are tested here, I can tell you in my school, I've learned this in grades 4 and 5. And some of the very basic structures of written English as well. Right? So I want to ask you the question then, well, if what's tested on the GMAT is so basic, then maybe everybody then will be able to do really well on the test, because we've all graduated from, certainly from secondary school, and most of us from high school. And I'd like you to ponder about this question. Is knowledge power? Let's just think about this in your head. Is knowledge really power? And I'm going to give you an example later on of really trying to see that if you do have a lot of knowledge, like for example, if you read a book about driving a car, does that really mean that somebody can now go and drive a Formula One car? Is that knowledge enough? And what is missing? And we're actually going to try to find an answer again from the GMAT. So if you go back and really ask people who create the test, what separates people who get 500 or 400 from people who get 700? And here's what the GMAT would say, and that's exactly in the words of the GMAT, because this is a direct quote from people who create the test. And that is, rather than testing your knowledge of any sort of a subject matter, including math and business, because we're trying to get into a business school, what the GMAT exam really measure is the higher order reasoning skills. So anybody can learn a formula, but would everybody have the ability to reason through the problem really on a very high level? Try to see through the clutter, try to see what's important, notice certain patterns, and choose an answer confidently within a very short period of time. So that's what we call the reasoning skills. Right? That's really what the GMAT is going to be all about. I will get back to this, and I'll actually give you the exact recipe, the step-by-step formula, that if you follow this formula, not only you can prepare for the GMAT, enjoy the process and get a 700 plus score, but if there's any skill you want to learn, if at some point you love the GMAT and you want to take up sailing or snowboarding or any other sort of a skill, or maybe playing golf, all you have to do is follow these steps, this formula. I'm going to give you this formula in approximately 45 minutes or so. Once we talk about some really important math theory that you need to know for the GMAT. So let's talk about this theory. This is the theory that you probably learned either in your junior school or in your secondary school. For most of us, it has been a while ago. So let me remind you what we've learned at that time. For some of us, we have some good associations. For some of us, maybe not so much. So let's relearn this. Let's talk about the properties of numbers. Now, I'm sure we've seen numbers before, But did you know there are different kinds of numbers that we use, even in our modern world? But certainly throughout history, people used all kinds of different numbers. In fact, people have existed on our planet for probably about 200,000 years. And the earliest numbers were found in caves and date to about 65,000 years ago. These are the numbers. They're very simple. We just had a 1, nothing else. Every time we needed to count something, we would just put that number 1, and then we just count them up. Then, of course, at some point, people started using bigger numbers. They needed to trade with each other. So ancient Romans came up with some shortcuts. They said, let's actually have some special numbers for the blocks of these ones. So 5 of these are going to be a V, and 10 of these is going to be the X. And that served people for quite a while until an Italian Fibonacci in the 11th century started introducing these numbers to the European world. It wasn't until the 15th and the 16th century that the Europeans actually started to use these numbers, and they called them the Arabic numbers. Now, if you're wondering, that the Arabic probably means they came from the Arab world, since the Roman numerals come from ancient Rome. That's actually not true. These numbers came from India. They originated in India about 2,000 years ago, and then eventually they made their way through Baghdad to Northern Africa, to Italy, and then they were adopted by Europeans. These are actually very useful numbers. You're going to be fascinated with how better these numbers are compared to some of the other numbers if you find out what were some of the limitations of the earlier numbers. For example, did you know that Roman numerals did not have a 0? So if you want to describe a 0, you actually couldn't with Roman numerals. They also did not have decimal numbers. Right? It's quite shocking that until about 500 years ago, Europeans did not have decimal numbers. And now, of course, we have all kinds of numbers. And all of these numbers are really built based on the digits. We have 10 digits in our Arabic numerical system. We also call this numerical system a decimal numeric system because there are 10 digits, right? There are all kinds of numbers in our universe, all kinds of numbers that you can potentially see on the GMAT. So I'd like to ask you, just maybe put things really quickly in the chat box. If I were to ask you, how many numbers are there, just to make sure that you know how to count numbers, right? How many numbers are there between 1 and 18 inclusive? So 1 and 18 inclusive. How many numbers? Just put them in the chat box. 1 and 18 inclusive. Okay, all right. Well, so let me tell you what most people said. So most people said 19. The next most popular answer was 18. The next most popular answer was 17. And the least popular answer was the infinite number of numbers. And the right number actually here is infinite. We do have an infinite number of numbers between 1 and 18 because I actually, in my question, never mentioned that the number has to be an integer, that has to be a whole number. But we all automatically assume that this is what I'm asking. And the reason why I wanted to demonstrate this to you is because that is exactly what the GMAT is going to do to you. It is going to give you things that are common knowledge, common sense. So unless you consciously train for the GMAT is going to find a way to get you into some sort of a trap or a trick. Oh, and by the way, if I did ask you for a whole number, the right answer is actually 18. Because it was 1 to 18. There are 18 numbers from 1 to 18 inclusive. Now, one of the useful things of how you can, things you could use on the GMAT to help you visualize the numbers is actually a number line. The number line is a continuous line. It doesn't have a beginning. It does not have an end. And you can visualize all of the integers evenly spaced on this number line. There's a 0 somewhere, and there are positive integers going one way and negative integers going the other way. But what about all that space in between the integers? These are still numbers. So that's hopefully going to help you remember what the numbers on the GMAT are going to look like. Now, all of the numbers on the number line are going to be the real numbers. The GMAT does not use complex numbers that have a base of a square root of -1. If what I just said sounds like a completely foreign language to you, do not worry. That's not tested on the GMAT. That is all from high school or from calculus. So all of the numbers on the number line. So the one very important concept about the number line that you do need to understand for the GMAT is a concept of an absolute value. So what is an absolute value? Well, let me ask you a question. I think that might be a little bit easier. If you can please put in the chat box, what would be an absolute value of 18? If I were to ask you, what's an absolute value of 18? What would that be? Okay, perfect. Most of you said 18. The right answer is indeed 18. An absolute value is positive, so cannot be minus 18. Okay, let me ask you another question. What's an absolute value of -7? -7, what's an absolute value? Okay, perfect. Yes, perfect. So all of you answered this correctly now. It is 7. Okay, now let me ask you another question. What is an absolute value of x? An absolute value of x. Okay, all right, perfect. Yeah, thanks for answering this question. Now, what is the absolute value of -x? All right, okay, so thanks for answering this. Everybody except one person said, actually 2 people, said that an absolute value of x is equal to x and an absolute value of -x is equal to x. So let me test this theory. If you say that an absolute value of x is equal to x, I'm going to try to take an x of, let's say, -7. So an absolute value of x is equal to x. Therefore, an absolute value of -7 is equal to -7. Does that sound right? Not quite, right? And what's an absolute value of -x? Well, if x is negative, an absolute value of -x is actually going to be -x. I know it sounds really strange. How could an absolute value be equal to -x? But if x is negative, then -x is going to be positive. So again, notice how just 2 minutes ago, we talked about our habits, how we all assume that the number is an integer. We've just found out we also usually assume that the number is positive. There's going to be a lot of these little assumptions that we make along the way that are going to potentially be used by the GMAT to try to trip us. So be aware of these and make sure that, again, you train for not falling into the GMAT traps. Let's now talk about how we use the digits. Now, the beauty of this numerical system, we have 10 digits and we can create any number we want out of these 10 digits. For example, if I were to show you this number, then you would know exactly what that number is. I don't have to explain it. You don't have to do any sort of calculations. You know exactly that it's 6,482.793. And as I was reading this number to you, you probably noticed how I was reading it, that I said 6,400, because these digits are in certain specific places in the number. If I were to simply go ahead and switch these 2 digits, if I were to switch the 6 and a 4, all of a sudden it's going to become 4,600, and that is not the same number. So that is why every digit has its place. And the digit 2 is in the units place. That's why we actually had this units digit strategy. That's the digits, that's the very last digit before the decimal point. Why do we call it the units? It's actually the number of ones, but we call them units and not ones. It is because what we can do if we have this number in front of us, we can actually break it down into certain weights. Every digit has a weight. The 6 has a weight of 1,000. So if you imagine this is a number of dollars or the amount of money that somebody would get, let's say, paid in cash. There would be $6,000 bills and $400 bills and so on. So that is how we really use the numbers. And understanding that this is how we use the numbers is something that you actually are going to need to know for the GMAT. I know all of you can do one multiplication or one addition, but understanding of how the process actually works is more important on the GMAT. Let's actually take a look at a question from one of the past exams. I am going to give you about a minute to think about this question. We will then talk about different ways of doing this question. And this question will actually be about using digits in a number. So here's the question. I'll give you a minute. Another 15 seconds. Please choose an answer if you haven't done so already. Okay, last call. All right, let me share with you what the answers are. And as you could see by the majority vote, the answer to this question is A. And then we have B and E that are distant second, and then of course C and D. So let's actually see whether A is indeed the right answer. Well, one of the ways how we approach this question is we could say, okay, well, I have two numbers. They're two-digit positive integers. They have the same digits, but in the reverse order. So what does this mean? Well, I could have a number, let's say 45 and 54. So S plus T will be 45 plus 54. That's 99. And that's why A is the right answer. I'm curious if you have chosen A, if that's how you chose it. Some of the other people are going to say, well, A is less than 100, everything else is more than 100. That's why maybe it's A, because A is a little bit different from the others. One important thing that you probably have noticed here is the word except at the end. So what this means is that 4 out of 5 of the answer choices here would be possible answers to this question, only one of them wouldn't. So what many people are going to do is they'll say, okay, well, let me try some numbers. For example, I could see what would happen if I take a random number, let's say 23 and 32. what I realize is, well, that's 55. So that's not really the number that I have in front of me. That's a little too small. So let me try some other number. How about maybe 25 plus 52? Oh, that's 77. That's again not the number that I see in front of me. So I need to keep trying. Well, 27 plus 72, well, that's 99. So that's great. I know that 99 could be one of the answers. The question was asking what couldn't be one of the answers. Therefore, I'm going to cross out A and I'll keep going. I've actually done this question in person with many people before they began studying for the GMAT. And almost everybody who would do this question will do it that way. So then they will keep going until they actually test all of the numbers. I've given you a very little time, and I was watching at what time many people chose an answer. And it was quite a while until I was actually forcing you to choose an answer. And that's pretty common. So that approach is going to take some time. So we need a better approach. And we've just learned a strategy. I've actually just explained to you exactly how the numbers work. So we could use that strategy to do this question. Now we're going to apply that strategy. So notice how, again, it's not really about knowing the theory. Everybody can read a book in a theory. It's how do you actually apply the theory. That is what's really, really important. I actually remember a quote that I read in a book just a few days ago. It was from Andrew Carnegie. It was an industrialist, a very rich person, that in the early 20th century, at that time, he said that millions of men and women go to school and college and spend many years acquiring abstract knowledge, but they haven't really been taught how to use it. They haven't been taught how to apply that knowledge. Right? So even over 100 years ago, he commented of how our school mostly teaches us that knowledge. So that's how we've been really conditioned to learn. And so we're going to have to break our habits here a little bit for the GMAT. So let's see how we can apply what we've just learned. Well, what we've just learned is how the numbers work, how I can actually break down a number like 6,000 into the thousands and the hundreds and the tens and so on. So if my number is a two-digit number, then I know that the first digit is going to be the tens digit, and the second one is going to be the units digit. So what I can probably say is, let S be a number of two digits. I'm going to call these digits X and Y. They're anywhere from 0 to 9, or maybe 1 to 9 for X. And then I also know that my second number, T, is going to have the same digits, X and Y, so whatever that number is from 1 to 9, but in reverse order. So what do I actually now do with it? I mean, again, theoretically, it's all understandable, but how can I use it? Well, you remember how we actually broken down the digits? We said that in S, X was the tens digit and Y was the units digit. So what I could say is that S, a number S, is actually 10 times X, because X represents the number of tens, plus simply 1 times Y, or plus Y. And I can do the same thing with T. The Y was now in the tens digit, the X was in the units digit, so it's simply going to be 10Y plus X. So if I were to add these numbers up, S plus T, I can simply add up these two numbers, and what I'll realize really quickly is that S plus T gives me 11 X's and 11 Y's. And if I were to simplify this a little bit more, I realize that it's simply 11 times the sum of two digits, X and Y. So S plus T, the sum of these two digits, has to be divisible by 11. That's a very important insight, because then if I look at the answer choices, I would notice that A, B, C, and D are all multiples of 11. And only one of these numbers, E, is not. Notice how the GMAT very cleverly put that number last. That's not always going to happen, but most of the people are going to be working through this question the way that we've just seen in the previous slide, so that by the time they actually get to E, they'll either be super frustrated or they will spend a lot of time, or both. But we can do this really quickly. If we notice what exactly we need for that question, we can literally do this question in a minute. starting from scratch. Now, can we do this question even faster? Is there a mastery way for this question? Can we, by doing very little math, figure out what is the right answer with a very, very high degree of confidence? Especially if you're nearing the end of your exam, that is very often what you might have to do. So again, I'm going to look at the answer choices, and I will notice a pattern. Now, there will be different patterns and different types of questions, right? So the strategy I'm going to show to you right now is specific to these types of questions. But almost every question on the GMAT will have some sort of a way to really figure out your answer without doing complicated math. So I see a pattern here, and the pattern is I've noticed, without really understanding maybe why, that 4 answer choices are multiples of 11, and only one of them is not. Now, the GMAT is asking me to find an exception. Notice that word except. So what is my exception? E. It is an exception to the rule, and it has to be the right answer. And I can do this literally in 30 seconds. My chance of success, extremely high. Now, how did I know that all of these numbers are multiples of 11 so quickly? Well, 99 is pretty easy. How about 121 or 132? Well, you may know that there are certain divisibility rules, that we can figure out whether a number is divisible by another number without actually dividing it. For example, if I were to ask you, is 132 divisible by 3? Yes or no? What do you think? Just please put it in the chat box. Is it divisible by 3? Yes, it is divisible by 3. Why? Because what we can do is add 1 plus 3 plus 2, all of the digits, we're going to get a 6. 6 is divisible by 3, so 132 is also divisible by 3. Okay, let me give you another one just to make sure we can really retain what we've just learned. Is 873 divisible by 9? Yes or no? Please put it in the chat box. 873, is that divisible by 9? All right, a few people said yes, a few people said no. Let's check. 8 plus 7 plus 3, that's 18. 18 is divisible by 9. So 873 is also divisible by 9. All we do is add up the digits together, and we see if that smaller number is divisible by 9. Okay, let's keep going. Let's try one more. Is 34 divisible by 7? Let's see. 3 plus 4 is 7. 7 is divisible by 7. So 34 is divisible by 7, right? I noticed some of you nodding your heads. Yes. No. 34 is unfortunately not divisible by 7. So this divisibility rule doesn't really work for 7. It does work for 3 and 9 when you're simply adding up the digits. And just because you came here to this seminar, tomorrow we are going to send you a link where you can download a cheat sheet with all of these divisibility rules and a lot of amazing GMAT formulas you can use. So make sure that we send you an email, you open that email and download. There's going to be a link to actually download the cheat sheet. You can print it and you can use it anytime except for the day of the test, unfortunately. There's going to be divisibility rules for pretty much every number until 10. That is what the GMAT is going to primarily test you on. Some of them are a little easier, like 3 or 5. Some of them are a little harder, like 7. And most people learn divisibility rules until 10. The majority of the books will teach divisibility rule by 10. What the GMAT likes to do is go a little outside the norm. The most favorite divisibility rule of the GMAT is the division by 11. Again, just because most people just go till 10, right? This is not complicated, guys. I mean, the GMAT is going to try to trick people. So what is divisibility rule by 11? Well, we've just used it actually for our question. And if I were to ask you, well, is 33 divisible by 11? You can say, well, of course. It's a 2-digit number, and the digits are the same. Is 132 is divisible by 11? You'll say, well, yes, of course. Because what I can do is I can add the 1 and a 2, and then I get a 3, and that 3 is a number in the middle. So that's also divisible by 11. Well, what if I gave you a number that's a little bit bigger than that? It has 5 digits. In fact, the most number of digits that I've personally seen on the GMAT, where the GMAT was testing this rule, had not 5, not 15, but 50 digits, 50. Imagine a number is 50 digits, and you need to figure out in less than 2 minutes whether that number is divisible by 11. In fact, the GMAT not just asked that, but asked, if you did divide this number by 11, what would be remainder? Sounds like fun, right? In 2 minutes. But it's something you absolutely can do. You absolutely can figure it out because there is a very useful rule. Here's how we're going to use this rule. Now, if I'm trying to figure out whether 21,879 is divisible by 11, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add up the digits, but I won't add up all digits. I will add up all of the digits starting from the units digit, and then as I go along, I'm going to skip digits. So I'm going to take every other digit. So it's going to be 2 plus 8 plus 9, and that, of course, I'm sure you can figure that it's 19. Now, I'm not quite done yet because there's some digits left. I will need to then add 1 and 7, and that gives me an 8. What's 19 minus 8? That is 11. As long as I can get here a number that's either 11 or any sort of a multiple of 11, 0, 22, or minus 11, then you know that the original number is also going to be divisible by 11. So what I'd like to encourage you to do is really do some exercises on divisibility rules. The divisibility rules are going to be in the cheat sheet that we're going to send to you tomorrow. So make sure you, number one, memorize them, and number two, practice with them. Try different numbers and see if that number that you try is actually divisible by 7 or by 8 or by 9 or by 11, and test yourself out. One of the things that we give to our students when they join our class is that we give them some exercises that are all based on this theory, all of the essentially mass refresher exercises that get them to test whether they know how to apply this rule. Because if you come to me and say, Sergey, well, I know the divisibility rule by 11, the first thing I'm going to say is, let's try. I want to see you apply this rule. That's really what's going to make a huge difference on the GMAT. Right? So as you were thinking what's most important for you when you are preparing for the GMAT, I hope that one of these things was to really know and train how to apply these rules and not just know them theoretically. Now, what we've just covered is a large chunk of the GMAT. A large chunk of the quant section on the GMAT has to do with all kinds of properties of numbers. And we started with digits. There are a few more that deal with divisibility and prime numbers, but that is really what is probably going to take up to a half of your questions on the GMAT. So arithmetic is the largest part of the GMAT. Make sure you're really comfortable with that. We spent quite a bit of time in our class talking about all of these properties of exactly how you can apply them on the GMAT to do this, sometimes very difficult questions. And we'll do a couple of more questions so that you actually can see what kinds of questions you could see on the test. But I want to talk briefly and do another question on another area on the GMAT that is the second biggest area, and that is algebra. Now, algebra is that area of math that people either love or hate. This is what I found all throughout my career, of course, studying myself and then teaching the GMAT for over 10 years. And what usually happens is that people would either hate algebra, but they have this kind of an attitude towards algebra that say, even though I don't like it, I have to use it because that's the way that we're going to do the questions, right? Most of us haven't necessarily learned a different way or a better way of doing the question. And if we're not very comfortable with algebra, then we're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. We're forced to use something we're not comfortable with. And that, of course, a recipe to get into some sort of a trouble. So it is important that you get more comfortable with algebra, but also keep in mind that many questions on the GMAT that have to do with algebra could actually be solved on a more conceptual way without doing too many calculations. And even algebra itself is very conceptual. I know you're probably thinking of algebra as, oh my gosh, there are so many different formulas. How am I even supposed to know all of these formulas and be comfortable with them? Just like if you haven't been to our verbal refresher class, next Saturday, we're going to do this on the weekend just so that some of the people from Europe and Asia are going to join us. There are a lot of different grammar rules on the GMAT verbal section that are potentially tested. There are so many of them. And yet, there aren't too many that you really need to know. So the same thing here. There isn't really too much that you need to know. You need to have a very good conceptual understanding of what algebra is. So let me give you an idea of what is the difference between arithmetic and algebra. An arithmetic problem would be something like this. We have two people, they have apples, and one of them has 5, another one has 3. Together, they would have, of course, 8 apples. Well, that's an arithmetic problem, simply requires an arithmetic calculation. Well, algebra would be something like this. There's something that is missing. Right? There's a problem where something is missing, something is not known. And the whole idea of algebra is to have a variable for the things that are not known. So these are numbers that we don't know their values. We just know they're numbers. Sometimes we know something about these numbers, like maybe we know there's an integer, maybe we know it's positive, just like when I asked you what's an absolute value of x. And sometimes we don't know anything. We know it's just a real number. So what could the GMAT do? Well, there are going to be all kinds of questions. I'll show you 2. One of the things that GMAT might ask you to do is simply solve an equation. Here's an equation. It's a very simple linear equation. And of course, in this equation, we would almost always be asked to find x. Sometimes the GMAT is going to ask us to find something else. Like, for example, in this question, the GMAT might ask us to find 3x. It really boggles my mind how many people in this question are going to find 3x, then divide it by 3, and choose x, even though the question asked for 3x. Or sometimes they'll then multiply it by 3, doing all kinds of unnecessary work. But if I were to ask you to find the x, you actually find the x. The only thing that you need to remember is that my equation was in balance. Right? 2 sides of the equation, side on the left and side on the right. And if I want to maintain this as an equation, all I need is to make sure whatever I do to the left side of the equation is going to be exactly the same thing that I'm going to do to the right side of the equation. So what I can do is I could subtract 5 from both sides of this equation. I could then, the next step, divide both sides of this equation by 3, and I'm going to what's called isolate the x. I'm going to find my x, and if that's what the question is asking, I am now done. Right? So this is what we're going to be calling solving a problem. Now, the GMAT, if you look at the official guide, there's a section that's dedicated to problem-solving questions. One of the things you're going to notice is that pretty much the only way that the GMAT explains how to do a problem-solving question is to solve a problem, get an answer, and then compare your answer with the answer choices and make sure that you choose the one that matches what you've got. Now, if you look at some of the explanations, you would notice that it is not really possible to do that on the GMAT within 2 minutes for a very large chunk of questions. So keep that in mind, that solving a problem isn't always necessary in a problem-solving question. There's usually going to be different strategies how you can get to an answer quicker with less math, which also means less chance of making a mistake. Now, equations are tested on the GMAT, on problem solving very often. Inequalities are also very often tested on the GMAT, and very commonly in data sufficiency. So we're actually going to do a data sufficiency question. But before we do that, I just wanted to give you a really quick thing that you need to know when it comes to inequalities. First of all, there are all kinds of different ways to be not equal. For example, one number could be larger or less than another number, or they can be equal or larger or equal or less, or they could simply be not equal, right? The bottom line is that the two sides and they're not equal to each other. So you are starting with the scales that are not in balance. However, you do have two sides, they're just not in balance. So technically, if you do the same thing to both sides, as long as you make sure that the inequality is still in the same imbalance, you should be okay. You should technically be able to do the same thing to both sides of the inequality and keep the inequality as a valid inequality. There is, however, an exception to this rule. There is an operation, or a couple of them, that if you do that operation to an inequality, all of a sudden, the inequality is not the same. Does anybody know that? If you can please put it in the chat box, I just want to get an idea if anybody familiar with that exception to the rule. And if there's something you do to an inequality to both sides, all of a sudden the inequality is not going to be the same. All right, yes, congratulations if you answered that question. When you're multiplying or dividing by a negative number, you are going to need to reverse the sign of the inequality. So in this inequality you see right here, we're going to need to divide both sides by -3, and therefore notice how the sign has changed. Now, if you want to test this, just try some numbers and see if it works, or you can just trust that it works. It always works. All right, I'd like to again see if we can apply this rule and not just talk about this rule by doing a data sufficiency question. Now, if you have not ever done data sufficiency questions, do not worry. I'm going to show you exactly what you need to do. Now, here's how the data sufficiency question is going to look like. Let me explain to you first, and then I will give you time to think about this. So you have a question. You cannot answer that question yet because you need some extra information. That extra information is provided in two statements. Your job isn't really to solve a problem or find an answer. Your job is to figure out which of these two statements is going to be necessary for you to answer that question. That's why if you look at the answer choices, you would notice they're not really dealing with an answer yes or no, or with some sort of numbers. They simply ask you, well, would statement 1 be enough to answer this question? Or would maybe statement 2 be enough? Or maybe you need them both, or maybe even if you take them both, maybe it would still not be enough. So if you haven't done that sufficiency question, make sure that you refer to what the answer choices mean. If you have, I'm sure you already know what they mean by now. So I'm going to give you 1 minute to deal with this question. All right, I'm going to now end the poll and show you the results. If you haven't chosen an answer, I'm going to give you 5 seconds. All right, let's see what the answer is. By the majority vote, the answer is A. The second most popular answer, as you can see here, is D. Then we get E, and then B, and nobody for C. So let's see. Let's actually see what was the difficulty of this question. If the answer is A, then the difficulty is probably about 60th percentile, because that's exactly how the difficulty of the questions is determined. Well, let's figure this out. Now, there are different ways of approaching this question, and I'm going to show you these ways. And if you have done the question that way, then perhaps you can relate, and perhaps you can learn a different way. So let's talk about first this theory way. Well, here's what we can do. Well, I know that in statement 1, x divided by y is more than 2. And the question was, is x more than 2y? Now, because we have 3 pieces of information, sometimes it's actually hard to understand what exactly do I know and what exactly do I need. But I would imagine we're past that. We know that the statement is something I know, and the question is something that I'm trying to figure out. So if x divided by y is more than 2, then it's very, very obvious that x is more than 2y. Right? I can just multiply both sides by y. So x is more than 2y, that means it's sufficient. The question was, is x more than 2y? I got an answer. Statement 2, x less than 2y is less than 0. Well, what I can do is I can move the 2y to the other side, and therefore x is less than 2y. The question was, is it more? So it is not sufficient. And I can actually do this in 1 minute. And the answer is indeed A, because statement 1 is sufficient, statement 2 is not. And that is not the right answer. Not the right answer. Well, maybe we need to know some strategies. Okay, well, let's see. One of the things that is important to understand is, what does it actually mean to be sufficient? Because here we said one sufficient, second one is not. Is that really true? What does it really mean to be sufficient? What am I looking for? So let's look at the strategy way. And that is really understanding what would be the process of going through the data sufficiency question. The sufficiency means that I get an answer, and I get a unique answer no matter what. So I need to have one answer from the statement. I do not need necessarily to get an answer yes, nor do I necessarily need to get an answer no. I just need one answer. Well, let's see. If statement 1 is x divided by y is more than 2, I can multiply both sides by y. X is more than 2y. What's my answer? Is x more than 2y? The answer is yes, it is. So it is sufficient. Let's look at statement 2. Statement 2 tells us x less than 2y is x is minus 2y is less than 0. Well, therefore, x is going to be less than 2y. In this case, I do get an answer as well, and that answer is no. It's okay to get an answer no. So that should also be sufficient. And I can do this in, again, 1 minute. So the answer should be D, because each statement on its own gives me a very definitive answer. And unfortunately, that's also not the right answer. So perhaps we do really need to go past just simply knowing what the data sufficiency questions are about, and get a little bit more to a deeper understanding of how the GMAT's trying to trick us. And when I show this to you, you might even want to pinch yourself a little bit, because we talked about this trick already twice in the last hour. And yet, most of us continue making these mistakes. That again talks about that it's not enough just to know something. So let me show you, so you can actually recognize for yourself what you might need to do differently here in this question. Well, statement one, what we've done before is we multiplied both sides by y, and this is how we got x is more than 2y. In doing so, we made a very big assumption. That's exactly the assumption we've already made twice here in this class, and that is we assume that y is positive. We were never told by the GMAT that y is positive. Therefore, that is not something we can assume. We'd like it to be positive, but it doesn't have to be. Therefore, if we don't know what y is, if we're multiplying both sides by y, it is possible we might have to flip the sign. Now, if y is positive, we won't. If y is negative, we will. Notice how our answer is going to change. From this one statement, we might potentially get either an answer yes or an answer no, depending on y, and we're not given any information about y. So therefore, this statement, what we were so confident about, is actually not sufficient. Now we're actually confident that we know what we're doing, so now we're going to be a little more confident in knowing what not to do. How about statement two? Well, statement two required us to add 2y to both sides, the left and the right-hand side. And if we were to do this, we are not going to flip the sign because there is no flip sign rule when you're adding or subtracting. It's only when you're multiplying or dividing. So in statement two, the answer is no. Is x more than 2y? No, it isn't. And notice how it doesn't really matter what y is. The answer is always going to be no, no matter what. And because we just got one answer, that statement is sufficient. So the answer is B, and we can do this question in 30 seconds. Now, let me ask you a question. How difficult do you think this question is? I know maybe when you looked at this question, it may have looked pretty easy. Do you think it's a difficult question? Do you think it's easy, or do you think it's medium? Just please put things in the chat box. What do you think? Medium? Medium? Okay, well, based on the poll of people on this call, not everybody answered this question. And of the people that did answer this question, 17% answered this question correctly. So this is definitely not a medium difficulty question, nor it is an easy question. This is a hard question. This is the question that's an approximately high 600s and the 700s level. Now, when you look at this question, it looks easy. And of course, if you know what you're doing, it's easy. And that's really what is going to determine your success on the GMAT. If you know what you're doing, things are easy. If you don't, things are really difficult on the test. But that is a difficult question because a lot of people are going to fall into a trap. So if you did fall into a trap, please pat yourself on the back and congratulate yourself on learning something awesome today. So let's talk about, I know there's a question here from Anwar, for it to be sufficient, does it not have to support the statement in the question? Well, the statement doesn't have to be supported. The statement is given to us as a piece of information, and the question is what we really need to answer. All right, so there has to be a certain direction of logic here in data sufficiency questions. By the way, data sufficiency questions are unique to the GMAT. So if you've never done the GMAT, you've probably never done them before. And once you're done with your GMAT, you'll never see them again, ever in your life, unless you become a GMAT instructor and start teaching these strategies to other people. So we talked just now about how difficult is this question, and I perhaps would like to shift our discussion a little bit and talk about what GMAT score would I really need for the test. And JD is going to come here probably in about 15 minutes and really talk about how important is the GMAT, how does it fit into the overall puzzle. It's certainly is not the only piece of the puzzle when it comes to your application. But let me just give you some stats of what score you might need. Now, these are last year stats. They're probably going to be updated this year. And but the numbers are fairly consistent from year to year. These are top US schools ranked by their GMAT score. And these are top Canadian schools, again, ranked by their GMAT score, but their average GMAT score from the last year application cycle 2019. So everybody who actually got into the program and started in 2019, these are the average scores that they've gotten. So notice how the average is fairly high in many of these schools. Both American and Canadian schools and European schools would be somewhere in between. Now, if you think about how the GMAT scores work, we talked about the scores 200 to 800. The average score on the GMAT is going to be approximately 560. It's the same worldwide, and it's approximately the same in Canada and in North America. Some of the countries are a little higher, some of the countries are a little lower. But here in North America, it's pretty much the same as in the rest of the world. It is a bell curved exam, so the higher you go, the less chance or the less probability that somebody would actually get that score. Just to give you an idea, a score of 700 is actually 88th percentile. So what this means is not that 88% of people get that score, is that 88% of people do not get that score. Right? So that's what it means. So I want to ask you a question then. Many people ask us, what's the success rate on the GMAT? How do you determine the success rate? And I want to ask you maybe this question is, what percent of people do you think worldwide get a score of 700 on the GMAT? What do you think? Just please put things in the chat box. What would be the percent of people who get scores of 700 on the GMAT or more? Okay, some of you are saying 30%, some of you are saying 10%, 12%. I'm curious, how did you calculate that math? Let me give you my answer, and we can come up, actually, all of your answers are exactly correct. They're exactly correct, and I'm going to explain why in a moment. Because my answer is 0.3%. Let me explain to you in a moment why it's actually 0.3% of people who get 700 score on the GMAT. If you begin thinking about the GMAT, so if somebody begins thinking about the GMAT, the first step they would usually do is they would go on the MBA.com website. There's 7 million people, unique visitors, who go on MBA.com every year. Of these people, 2 million people will create an account on MBA.com. So they'll actually leave their information, their name, their phone number, their email address. They will create an account. Hopefully one day, they will do the test. Of these 2 million people, 200,000 will actually take the test, and of them, 24,000 will get a score of 700 or more. So if you divide 24,000 by 7 million, that's 0.3%. And when I asked you this question, what is important is to understand percent of what people. When I asked you what percent of people would get that score, well, I never said percent of what people. Now, is it percent of all people who do the test? Is it percent of all people in the world, in which case it's, of course, a much smaller percent? Or is it percent of all people who are thinking of doing the GMAT? So everybody who takes at least one step to preparing for the GMAT, they either download the book, or they get some sort of a resource, or they go on MBA.com, it is less than 0.3%. So it's approximately 1 in 300 people. I find it quite shocking. By the way, this is official statistics from MBA.com. So why is that? Why is that when people really understand that a graduate management degree can help them move their career forward, help them make way more money, and the average return on investment for an MBA program is $2.6 million over the lifetime, just to give you an idea of return on investment. $2.6 million, that's an average return on investment of an MBA program. So why would it most people are going to give up? One of the big reasons for that is that the way we approach our studies. What many people do when they're thinking of studying for the GMAT, the first thing that comes to their mind is that I'm going to do the same thing I've done before when I prepared for other exams. So what did I do? You're gonna hit the books and review. In fact, there are some test preparation centers that are actually called review, a so-and-so review. And the idea there is to review something, but when you review something that you've learned before, right? Or you like review a book. So that's again the idea that I already know it, I just need to review it. So what many people do is they're gonna hit the books and they can either get the official guide or they can get these books or these books or these books or these books. And then eventually they just overload themselves with the amount of books or the number of books. And then many people notice how 97% of people would actually give up. 97% of people who think of doing the GMAT will never actually do the test. Only 3% of people will. So if you actually even show up for the test, you're already in the top 3%. I think that's pretty amazing, right? You just, of course, have to beat the remaining people who did actually show up. And it is all because many people still believe that knowledge is power. And I promised I'm going to share with you that very important missing step. So what many people do is they read a book and then they feel like reading a book is enough for them to, let's say, drive a car or do the GMAT. Because the books give a theory review, but they don't really teach the skill. The skill is something that you have to do. It is learning by doing. And we'll actually talk about practicing and learning in a moment. But let's talk about these 3 steps of mastering this game. Now, the first step is indeed going to be reading a book. If you've learned how to drive a car, indeed, you needed to learn the rules first. That's exactly what you're going to do when you're preparing for the GMAT. You're going to review the theory, and it's really going to be important that you practice applying that theory. So again, like I mentioned, with our classes, you're going to get access to a resource where you're going to be practicing in an adaptive environment. You can do it on a computer or an app on your phone or an iPad, and you can answer these questions and you can keep reviewing things you've already learned. So that is going to be step number 1, review your theory. Step number 2 is not going to be just go and drive a car. It is not going to be just show up for the test. That's what actually a lot of people do. Step number 2, I need to learn a skill. Learning a skill requires immersing yourself in the skill. It is learning by doing. The majority of the people are going to come to a class because this is a more economical way to learn by doing. You're there with other people who are learning the same thing. Some of the people are going to choose to do this one-on-one. And what's really, really important in this process is that whichever strategies you're going to learn, you have to learn these strategies up front. So you learn them first, you try them out. Again, remember, this is learning by doing. And then you also need to get feedback as you're learning. So when you come to our class, it's a program for 6 or 12 weeks in a very, very structured way. We're going to get you to do things in class. And the idea is that by the time you leave any class that focuses on a specific topic, you will have experienced for yourself what's it like to answer the question quickly and accurately so that you can actually develop the skills that are going to be necessary for your success on the GMAT, that are going to help you get to where you want to be, to what was most important for you in your career. So that's the idea. It's learning by doing, but it's a very structured environment. Now, of course, you also have to dedicate some time to practice. So after class and between the classes, you have to practice. Now, you may have heard the word practice makes perfect. That is not exactly true. Practice makes perfect only if you're practicing perfect skills. Then you get more and more perfect with time. I like a different phrase that practice makes permanent. The more you practice something, the more permanent it becomes as a habit. I've met a lot of people who've been studying for a very long time, using different resources, and it was really, really hard for them to break these habits and took a very long time. And they literally spent an extra year, perhaps, not going to school because they had to break these habits. and they had to relearn many things to eventually get that high score. I've met people who've done this for 3 or 4 years and been studying for 2 to 3 years, and it took them another year to really break this habit. Now, one good thing is with our program, you can actually come back to any class for free for 1 year, and nobody takes more than a year, but it does sometimes take a long time to break some of the old habits and learn some of the good habits. Now, when I share this with many people, they would very often say, wow, I didn't actually know this. I didn't know that there's a process, there's a system to studying for the GMAT. It is really a learning by doing process. And as long as you learn these good strategies up front and practice them, the GMAT is going to become so much easier. We see an average score improvement in our students of 180 points, and many of them would improve even much higher. I'm going to show you some examples. So how the structure of this program works is essentially our program would be, you would come to a class, you would study with us for 6 or 12 weeks. So a 6-week program is a commitment of about 20 hours a week between the class and a homework, and at 12 weeks is approximately 10 hours a week. So you can decide whether you want to study a little more efficiently, or you want to spread this to a slightly longer time, but also have more time for other commitments in your life. It's a fairly small class. Right now, these are virtual classes. You can actually go on our website. We'll send you a link tomorrow, and you can see what the virtual classes are going to look like. They are a little bit different from this class because in a virtual class, we can interact. You can unmute yourself, and just as you can see the instructor sees you. It is a small class. The instructor has a big screen, and all of your web cameras and faces are on that screen, and he can interact with you in real time. There's a lot of structure, a lot of accountability as well. You can choose what level of accountability you want. For some of our students, we, in addition to time in class, we touch base with you every 2-3 weeks. I'm coaching 2 of our students in a current class where we're touching base every day. So every day I get a report from them and I give them coaching. So you can decide how much or how little you want in terms of coaching. Now, we do have a very special offer as our thanks for you coming here today. And that offer is, if you join our program, not only are you going to be able to save some money with an early bird discount, but if you go to this page, admitmaster.com/offer, click on the link and book your consultation to get into our course. Now, you do have to attend the consultation to get into our course because we want to make sure that you're ready and we set you up for success right from the beginning. So that coaching process starts before you even committed to joining our class. We want to make sure it's a two-way street, that you're very committed, because we are absolutely committed to you 100%. There's a 100% guarantee for this course. We are going to work with you until you are done with your GMAT. That's why we want to make sure that you're really committed. So to give you an incentive really to start taking action that is going to move you towards what's really important to you, is if you register for this consultation before Sunday this week, we're going to give you a completely free MBA resume. That's usually a service that's $300 from our company. So you're going to get this completely free, but you do have to book that by Sunday this week. There are 2 options. You can either study on evenings, and that's going to be the program that starts on June 23rd, or you can study on weekends. This is a program that weekend mornings, and that is going to start on July 11th. You're going to find all of these prices. They are different in different currencies, but this is the price in Canadian dollars. There are other options as well. For example, if the live virtual program doesn't work, you can take an on-demand virtual program, and you can also take a program that simply gives you access to practice resources, but does not necessarily include any support. So it will be a lot more budget friendly. Now, I want to show you one final question. I know in about 3 minutes, we're going to ask John Derrick to share the MBA application tips with us. But I want to do this one real quick question, and that is another problem-solving question. Now, that is going to be a word problem. So I'll give you 15 seconds to read it. All right, so this is a question. I hope you're very clear about what this question is asking. Would you like to see the answer choices? Well, here they are. Now, let me ask you a question. Do the answer choices really help? Or do they maybe make the question even more confusing? I think the question itself was confusing. And when I give this question to our students in class, very often in some of these workshops that we're doing in person, people would be reading these 3 or 4 times before they can really understand what's going on. But what's really going on here is that we have a distance rate time problem. Aaron is leaving home, he goes for a run, it's summertime, we can now exercise outside. So he's jogging from home, then he's turning around, he walks back home at 2 different speeds, and he's spending a total time of t. And we need to know how far did he go. Looks super confusing, especially since the answer choices are variables. Now, what we probably could do is we could say we have a distance from home and a distance back home, and the times together are going to be t, and then the distances are the same, and we can build another equation. Another equation, that's exactly what you're going to see in the official guide and in 99.9% of GMAT forums. I don't know about you, but after 5 minutes, I lose interest or I get lost. And most people are just going to give up. So let's jump directly into the mastery way of doing this question. By the way, this is not an easy question, just in case you're wondering. You've seen it for yourself. Here's what I'm going to do. I remember the distance is equal to rate times time. Even if I forget the formula, I remember that if I'm driving from Toronto to London, Ontario, and I know it takes me 3 hours, and I'm driving at 100 kilometers an hour, I know the distance is 300. Or if 2 hours, that is 200. I'm never going to add the speed and time. I know that it's not 102, I know it's 200. It's so obvious, even if I forget the formula. But notice how what the GMAT's trying to do here is it is trying in some answer choices to add speed and time. Who in their right mind would add speed and time? So B adds speed to time, D adds speed to time, and E adds speed to time. So we've eliminated 3 answer choices. We're down to 2. And I want to be lazy because I want to do as little math as possible. Well, A looks like a simpler answer. I'm going to try to test A, and if it's not A, it has to be C. So A is x divided by y, which is miles an hour divided by miles an hour. The speeds cancel out, and I have hours left. So A gives us hours. Well, wait a second, we need miles. The question was how many miles? So the answer has to be C. That's the only answer that's left. And we can do this literally in 30 seconds. Now, if you learn all of this, you can absolutely guarantee yourself, as long as you learn it and practice it, a much higher score. Like I've mentioned, our students achieve an average score of 670, and fully 35% of our graduates achieve scores of 700. And of everybody who begins to study with us, about 3/4 of people will actually do their GMAT, and about 1/4 will, for some family reasons or personal reasons, sometimes won't, but fully 3/4 will. So about 30% of people who begin studying with us will get scores of 700. And if you remember, the average was actually 0.3%. So your chance of getting a score of 700 is 100 times more if you do this. So if there's something that was stopping you from doing this, I'd like to invite you to really think about what's stopping some people from doing this. Some people are saying, look, I don't have the time. And to be honest with you, I think this is one of the craziest excuses, because if you need to spend some time learning the strategies that are going to shave off 2-3 years from GMAT preparation and get a much higher score, potentially get a scholarship, thus reducing the time that's going to take to pay back the debt, I think this is an amazing investment to invest some time in preparing for the GMAT. And then, of course, some people are saying, I don't have really the money. I don't have the money to prepare for the GMAT. And I think we've already covered that. time is money. If somebody's thinking of doing well on the GMAT and starting their MBA sooner and getting some scholarship to get a better return on investment, what better way of doing this than to really put your head down, learn some amazing skills, and do your MBA sooner and get to that career that you would really, really want, that will get you to where you want to be much sooner. Here's what, just to give you a really quick example of one of our students who began studying with us in January. Within 7 weeks, he got a score of 760. So he studied about 30 hours a week. 6 weeks, they went a little above and beyond what we normally recommend. And within 7 weeks, he can do this. We have lots of examples. You can go on our Google page and you can see a lot of examples. We don't have the time for me to share all of these examples with you, but feel free to go on our website. There's a link to go and see some of these stories of other people as well. Now, of course, the GMAT is just one piece of the puzzle, and I'm going to unshare my screen in just a moment and let JD talk about the MBA admissions tips. And I'd like to invite you in the meantime to also come to our other workshops. There'll be a verbal refresher workshop next Saturday. There'll be some other workshops that we offer. We're doing all kinds of workshops, not just always related to the GMAT. For example, we're doing a workshop on the interview skills and on really connecting with other people in a group, on networking skills and so on. Live virtual classes right now. These are the 2 classes that are starting in June and July. We do not yet know when we're going to be able to restart our in-person classes. I think that's everybody's guess for now. What we found though is that virtual classes are as good or even better when it comes to the GMAT, because you're doing this from the comfort of your home. So look for an email tomorrow with a link to all of these resources. You can also visit admitmaster.com/offer to get access to all of these resources. I will stick around. I will come back to answer all of your questions, but I'd like now to stop sharing my screen and ask JD to share yours.
Yeah, thanks so much, Sergey, and appreciate you having me involved today. And it's my pleasure to be joining everyone here. So I'm just going to share my screen. Everyone, can you see it, Sergey, the screen?
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Oh, perfect. So for about the next 15 minutes, I want to share a little bit around some admissions tips and tricks. So provide you some advice as you think about applying to MBA schools and such. I won't do an introduction about myself or my background. What I would do is invite you to connect with me on LinkedIn. You can learn a lot about my background. I mean, I've spent several years working in higher education, business education. And really what I really enjoy about my job is helping people make the decision to do an MBA. And so working with candidates, meeting people all over the world. And so please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I share many articles about MBA programs and just to help you as you think about making the decision. I want to start because I think this is a really important decision. And Sergey, you did a great job in sort of your wrap up of talking about the decision to do an MBA program. I came across this TED Talk a couple of years ago by somebody called Ruth Chang, and it's called How to Make Hard Choices. And I'd really suggest that you watch it because doing an MBA program is a very difficult decision. There's almost 2 decisions you think about. One is, should I do an MBA or not? And the other aspect is once you decide to do one is how do I choose amongst the different programs that are there? Ruth has an interesting story. She did an undergraduate degree in philosophy, and because of pressure from her parents of what do you do with a philosophy degree, she went to law school. Went and became a lawyer, hated it, went back and did her PhD in philosophy. And her research and a lot of work she does is around this idea of making decisions. And in this video, she talks about 3 things that I think are very relevant as you think about doing an MBA program. The first is, she talks about what makes a hard choice. And basically this quote does it, is it's really any time that you look at doing a pros and cons list. That's really what makes a hard choice. And you'll find as you kind of, think about the decision to do an MBA or not, and you think about choosing amongst different schools, you'll find that one alternative is better in some ways, the other alternative is better in other ways, but neither is better than overall. And that really sums up a pros and cons list. The other thing she talks about, and I think this is really important to keep in mind, is when we're faced with a difficult decision, And this goes back to what Sergey was saying, that, I found it fascinating that only 3% of people go on and do a GMAT. And when we're faced with a difficult decision, sometimes what we do is default to the easiest choice. And the easier path in some of this is just not to do an MBA program. You're not quitting your job. You don't have to put time into, into preparing for the GMAT. And I would encourage you as you go through this is to kind of, always make sure that you're checking yourself, that you're not making the easy decision, you're making the right decision. The next thing that Ruth talks about is giving you some advice on how you approach a difficult decision. And she talks about it in the way that you approach a difficult decision in the idea of, how do you, and you formulate and ask that question about what matters most to you. And really start about, as you think about doing an MBA program, is what matters most to you? What do you want to get out of the experience? And that's both from a experience side as you go through the program, but it's also about what kind of career that you'd like afterwards, and really evaluate your options against that criteria. I'm going to talk to you, a little bit about, I really do think that rankings are very important that you look at as you're kind of doing your research. And I think that's incredibly important. But I would caution you not to look at rankings on the overall score. And at Ivy, we're very proud. We're #1 in Canada and Financial Times, #1 in Business Week. But what's more important is those rankings are based on certain criteria and surveys that people fill out. And so the best way to look at rankings is when you decide what matters most to you, it's kind of going to those rankings and looking at the various components against that criteria. So I'm gonna share with you what's important to us at Ivy, just to give you a sense and an introduction to our school. Is what's really important to us is quite simple. It's the education experience that we deliver, the impact that education experience has had on individuals as they move forward in their careers post-MBA. And when I say move forward in their careers, that's right up into the time that they stop working. And also what recruiters think of the talent that we bring into our program. So I'm going to share, just to give you a sense of some of the rankings that we're really proud of against what matters most to us. So Economist ranks every year, 100 business schools globally. They look, they ask various questions of people that have completed the program. And we're ranked top 10 in the world out of 100 business schools for 3 years in a row on what the education experience was. We're also ranked by The Economist as well, top 20 in the world this past year, #16. So 4 years in a row, top 20 for what the students thought about their career services they received in the program. #1 MBA program in Canada as far as career progress goes. So that's, salary before entering in, salary. And this is really, Financial Times looks at alumni 3 years out, as well as the level of positions, the organizations they're involved in, and their salary. And we're #15 MBA program globally for networking by Bloomberg Business Week. And so this is based on what the students thought about their interactions of alumni when they were in the program, what alumni interactions are with each other afterwards, and also what the recruiters think of the brand power and of the program itself. I'm just going to talk to you about who's an Ivy MBA, but more importantly, I'm going to give you some advice. And I think as you look at doing an MBA program, wherever that is that you never ever self-select yourself out. And I think you never want to self-select yourself out that you're an MBA candidate, never ever self-select yourself out from a particular school. And if you see in my LinkedIn profile, I did my MBA, on the older end of the spectrum. I always wish I did it earlier. And the reason I didn't earlier is because I didn't think I was a typical MBA candidate. My background is an arts degree. I didn't do math after, really grade 10. And I always wish that I did it earlier. Really what every school is looking for, and we're no different here at Ivy, is we're looking for tomorrow's leaders. And tomorrow's leaders come from various different backgrounds, various different, backgrounds, both educationally and also industries. We've had individuals come in last year, 2 years ago, we had a chef in our program. We had a wine sommelier, people that are professional musicians, people that served in the armed forces, people with arts degrees. And so that diversity is incredibly important to have in a classroom. So I can't stress enough, never ever self-select yourself out. Just to give you a sense of our classroom environment, we have about 150 students in our program. We have, 24, very international in nature, 25 different passports represented, 24 different birth countries represented. Average age is 28, so very similar, 24 to 35, many full-time MBA programs. Average experience 5 years, but 34 different industries represented. We have about 50% of our class is born outside of Canada, just the nature of Canada itself, but about 30% of our class immigrate to Canada to take our program, so they're under a student visa. Now I'm going to share with you some tips on the application process. Here's what we look at here at Ivy is we do the assessment based on 5 factors. And Sergey, I won't talk about the GMAT or GRE. You did a great job kind of summarizing it today and some fantastic tips, some that I will borrow moving forward to share with candidates. So I won't talk much about the GMAT or GRE, but as Sergey mentioned, it is one component of the application. Really what we do is look at, and I'm going to talk a little bit about leadership experience and potential and references, because those really go hand in hand together. I'm also going to talk about previous academic experience, because that really is sort of correlated to the GMAT, and I'll talk about that, and then give you some advice about admissions interviews. You're going to see very similar assessments across various programs. They may be called different things, but you're going to see various assessment factors in these programs as well. Work experience. So like many MBA programs, we require some work experience after you finish your undergraduate degree. We require 2 years full-time work experience after you finish. There are 2 components where you would express your work experience. And again, each program's a little bit different, but generally what they do is they'll ask to include a resume or a personal statement sometimes, or an online application. Many times the online application is where you would fill out, the information, what you do. So your job description and such. The resume or a personal statement that some programs ask for is where you would really focus on your accomplishments and impact. And I'm going to give you some advice as you think about your work experience applying for an MBA program. You really want to think about that work experience, not as much about what you do, but answering that question about what are the accomplishments and impact that you're most proud of in your professional career. And thinking about those are really when we think about what does leadership experience and potential mean. It doesn't mean that you are in a leadership role and have people reporting to you. It really means what is the accomplishments and impact I've had. And it's very easy. If somebody asks what I do for work, it's very easy to talk about what you do. It takes a lot of thinking and sometimes parking your humility a bit to talk about, how well you've done your job and those accomplishments and impact that you're most proud of. So here are some things that you want to think about highlighting. And again, we're not looking for all of these. No other school is looking for all. This is just about giving you some examples of what you might include. Think about those times you did initiative. You really took some initiative. The ability to get things done where you've had to self-manage, work and get things done with very little direction, where you've had to have big picture thinking, where you've worked in a team. I think that's really important. And think about it in the way sometimes struggles in teamwork and how you've had to work with it. How many times, those opportunities where you've had to develop team members so you were generous towards them, where you've had to work with multiple stakeholders. And so that teamwork's an important part that we look for in MBA candidates. Where you've had to persuade and communicate. I always share the example that we have a faculty member that teaches in entrepreneurship and says that 5%, if you're getting funding, 5% is your idea, 95% is the way that you sell it. And so think about those times at work and your professional, where you had an idea and you actually had to sell your idea. Making and assisting decisions. And I put assisting decisions in there because many individuals are not in roles where they make big decisions, but they are in roles where they assist in decisions. I was talking to a candidate recently, and they said, well, I don't really make decisions. And I said, well, do you make recommendations? And they said, yeah, all the time. He was at an analyst level. And I said, yeah, all the time I make, recommendations. I said, well, do they act on it? Yeah, they do. And I said, well, then you're making decisions. And the last is around solving problems and, where have there been problems where you solve. So again, these are just giving you some highlights and examples of what you might want to include in an application. The references. I mean, each school is different. We have reference forms that individuals fill out. You know, different schools have different requirements of who should be a reference. But I think when you think about selecting references, the best advice that I have is think about references that can speak best to your character and abilities. So as you think about those experiences you want to highlight, make sure that you pick references that were involved in those experiences. So you have alignment between what you're focusing on in your application and then what you're going to have your references fill out. It's really important to meet with your referees, tell them about why you want to do an MBA, explain to them about those things that you're highlighting in your application, and provide them a deadline. But I think the key thing, advice I have about references, is make sure there's alignment between, here are the experiences I'm going to really highlight in my application, my admissions interview, and making sure that the references are aligned with that. Previous academic experience. And this is where it comes into the GMAT or GRE is, you know, this is what we do. Some schools are different, but a lot of them are similar, is we look at your entering or your GPA or admission GPA and the 2 years of your most recent degree. So if you did a 2-year master's, we'll focus on the 2-year master's. Myself, I did a 3-year degree, so they focused on the 2nd and 3rd year of my grades. We also consider the program of study. So, you know, again, using myself as an example, I did a history degree. None of my, courses that I did in my undergraduate degree were quantitative in nature. So they put more emphasis on my GMAT, the quantitative scores on the GMAT. So that's considered. It's very important that, you know, and we're no, you know, as I do a lot of panels with other schools and stuff. And one of the things is that we don't have a minimum GPA. You will see, and we're no different than many schools, is that, you know, there's an average GPA that enters in. Ours is around 77% last year, B+, but we have no minimum GPA. And the reason for that is we look at the GPA and as well as look at the GMAT for that proof that you can handle the academic rigor of the program. So if you have poor grades, you shouldn't self-select yourself out of the program. You just need to spend more time preparing the GMAT, and you need to get a great GMAT score. And so I'm going to use myself as an example. I will be quite honest with you. I had horrible grades in my undergrad. And again, that comes back to why I self-selected out of not doing an MBA program. So I spent a lot of time preparing for the GMAT. And, you know, my poor grades in my undergraduate degree was a function of me being young. It was a function of me maybe not enjoying the coursework. It wasn't a function of my academic capability. And so there was much more weighting put on my GMAT when I applied. So that's an important thing to consider. Essay tips. So as you fill out applications, we have a video essay. We also have written essays. But just a couple of tips around the essays. I think the most important part is to make sure you answer the question. And I'm going to talk about that with the bullet point. The third bullet point is when you give your essay question to somebody else to proofread and give it, and I really encourage you to do that, is don't give them the question, give them the answer. And then ask them as they read and proofread your answer to let you know what they think the question is. The best way to make sure that you have answered the question. The other tip I have is the truth is better than playing the game. And, you know, sometimes one of the mistakes people do is they fill out essays is they, you know, are not authentic to what they are. And then what happens is as you move to the interview stage where they'll kind of refer to your essays, if your essays are not authentic and they ask you to kind of explain more about what you put in your essays, the story starts to collapse, the interview does not go well. The advice I always give people about essays is many admissions committee members, when we read applications, we read it on an individual basis as we prepare for committee meetings. And so the advice I have about essays is imagine you're not speaking to an audience, but you're speaking to an individual. That makes sure that your essays are personal in nature. That also makes sure that, you know, you're sort of, you know, speaking best to your audience. Again, every school is different, but, you know, most schools have individual members of the admissions committee review your file before the meeting. It's really important when you give your essay to proofread. It's really about editorial, fixing grammar. It's not about changing tonality. That is, when you wrote it, that is authentic to you. And sometimes what happens is if you have somebody proofread and you start to editorial, you lose your voice and you take on their voice. The biggest mistake is that people try to fit everything in a limited time or word limit. The essays are designed to be a snapshot, and you'll have the opportunity to explain further in an interview. I'm a big person in analogies. I'm going to give one. And I actually have one around the GMAT is like a marathon, right? So if you think about ever preparing a marathon, you have to make sure that you train for it. And so what Sergey talked about today, I can't stress enough the work that you put into the GMAT and the training for it. And the training is not just, understanding the knowledge. It's a lot about the tips and everything else, because it's about getting through the material quickly as well. But the analogy I use about essays is quite simple this way, is that it's like the trailer to the movie. And if you think about a movie, which is about 2 hours long, when you think about the trailer that kind of teases you to watch the movie, it's about 2 minutes, 30 seconds, maybe 3 minutes. And so think about the essays as the trailer to the movie being the interview. And then finally, be clear, be concise, creative, but most importantly, be yourself. And that's throughout the whole process. I can't stress that enough, to be yourself. Interview tips. Interviewing is very much about telling stories, right? You're talking about your experience, you're talking about your impact and accomplishments. It's storytelling. Be prepared to talk about those stories, but not scripted. Be yourself. Important to do research, important to practice for the interview. Practice telling your stories to somebody else. And then have intelligent questions prepared for your interview. What we do with candidates is we spend time preparing them for the interview. We help them do that. So once they go to interview stage, we have various podcasts. We'll set up a call. This is not about here are the questions you're going to get, but helping you to be prepared about what you can expect in the interview process. Some final thoughts. I think the biggest thing I have is it's so important to connect with each school before you submit an application. It's great when we are going to an admissions committee and we talk about a candidate that we've met with through the process. We're here to help. We're here to help to put your best foot forward. And it's really important that you connect with each school. Really important to get to know the culture of each school. Beyond looking at websites and brochures and looking at curriculum, it's really important to get to know the culture of the school. And so back to when you think about what's an important criteria for you, really think about the culture of the school and what you're looking for. You're only going to do one MBA. You want to make sure that, there's a fit culturally with the school with what you're looking for. And the last one is be thoughtful about your final decision. It is a lifelong decision. And so be very thoughtful about it. I'll leave you with this quote. And I think this really fits well with when you decide to do an MBA. And over the years, I can't stress enough what a life-changing experience doing an MBA is for individuals. And, I think about international students that come to Canada and make Canada their life. And I think about people and their career path that they've had. And really, this anonymous quote is really important. It's, you're always one decision away from a totally different life. And I think that fits an MBA program. Just some next steps as it pertains to Ivy. If you're, one of the things we do is we say to people, do a preliminary assessment. Send in your resume or LinkedIn profile, and what we'll do is let you know if we see a fit with your background to what we look for. It's not an admissions decision. It's about going forward. Should I go forward in the application process? And back to connect with each school early. It allows us to connect with you early on in the process. We have tons of webinars and podcasts that you can go and watch. We have different events that we have, and then the application process there. So with that, that's the end of my presentation. I know it was quick, but I hope that you gained some information on, some tips and tricks and just learned a little bit more insight as you think about putting your application together, and more importantly, think about the decision to do an MBA. So with that, Sergey, I'll turn it back over to you. So.
Thank you so much, JD. I've learned a lot, and I really appreciate how you've put together these tips in a very practical way, but really going back to what we talked about at the very beginning of this seminar, is understand what's really important to you. Why are you doing this? Now, I know many people are thinking of doing their MBA because they want to make more money, and that's okay. And just like I shared with you, there's some research that's been done. An average MBA will yield a return of $2.6 million over the next 20 years of your career. So it's a pretty good investment.
Definitely.
But even beyond the money, it's just changing the career. I'm doing this job right now. I completely love it, and I wouldn't have done this had I not done my MBA.
Yeah.
And I've done my MBA personally also a while ago. I graduated 16 years ago, and I see some of the people who went to school with me, and I see some of the work they're doing, and it's just amazing. And my classmates all over the world. So to me, if anybody asked me, was this a good investment? Any day of the week, I'll say this was an amazing investment.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And life-changing in the friendships you meet too, right? So I think that's always important, is that, you know, I think when you do an MBA, you're earning two things. You earn a network and you earn the degree. And you can never forget that when you go through and do one. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. And some of these people, you can't just connect with them on LinkedIn. So you might be sitting in a class next to somebody who's going to be the next entrepreneur, who's going to invest the next Instagram. You never know. It might be you, right? Especially if you go to entrepreneurship class and really learn how to master that selling process of 95%.
Yeah.
And
I see a question that came in. I can grab it quick because it says, what GMAT score is enough to be a good spot to be admitted to Ivy? So I forgot to mention that in it. When I talked about, and Sergey, you talked about this in your presentation, is it is one component of the file. So the range, you know, when we look at a file, we look at all of those criteria that I talked, you know, those assessment factors. Our average GMAT, as you mentioned, Sergey, is 671. But our score range is anywhere from 530 to 780. And so that just gives a sense that there is a wide range that's there. You know, I think one of the things that's important is that if you apply to our program, and we will not turn down somebody if the only concern we have is the GMAT on their application. So if the only concern we have on is their GMAT, we will ask them to, you know, rewrite and do a conditional offer. And so, you know, you don't want to apply with a 380. You want to apply within that range. You don't want to apply with a 480. You want to apply within that range. But there are cases where people will apply and will say, you're a fantastic candidate. You need to get a higher GMAT score. And so we'll give you a conditional offer upon receiving a score of XYZ on the GMAT by a certain date.
Great. And that's really amazing.
Yeah.
And that's, and don't try to assess yourself. Prepare a good application.
Yeah.
Apply, get connected with the school.
Yeah, absolutely.
We had a couple of questions from a person from Calgary, Amanda. Is there any remote program? And I guess the answer is no, you do have to come.
Yeah.
But is there a remote program in Calgary?
No, we don't. So yeah, we don't have one. So yeah, you would have to physically come to our campus. So yeah.
And what's the minimum work experience required for an executive MBA?
Yeah, so that's interesting. Executive MBAs, the minimum work experience is 8 years. The average work experience is about 15 years. So yeah. And many of those individuals that are sort of in that 8 to 10 years of experience, we spend a lot of time with them, you know, talking about which program is the best fit with what their career goals are. Because although they're the same degree, executive MBA and MBA programs, there are different destinations that they lead to. So the MBA program, full-time MBAs are much more designed for career changers. You know, 91% of our full-time MBA class will make a career change. In the executive MBA, it's much more designed for career acceleration. So accelerate into your current function or your current industry to more senior level roles.
And thanks very much for mentioning this. We have sometimes people coming to ask that they really feel like a one-year program at Ivy would be a good fit for them, and yet they're concerned that they wouldn't have an internship. And I usually give them a lot of examples of some of our students who were able to change a career after a year. So what advice would you give to somebody who is thinking of changing the career, who really feels like that internship is a factor that they're worried about?
Yeah. So what we, in our interview process, so allow us to help you with that decision. Mm-hmm. So our interviews are actually done by the career coaches that coach people in the program. And so it's not done by admissions and recruitment staff. It's done by the career coaches. And they really, that's for the mutual benefit. It's about making sure that the person's coming in with the experience that fits with what recruiter expectations are. And that we feel confident that we can deliver, on their career promise. So you go back to what they thought about the career assessments, the high rankings that we've had with education experience. We have higher placement rates in two-year programs. And again, a big part of that is in the admissions process is making sure. I had a call with a candidate today that we turned down. They're a fantastic MBA candidate, but they need a two-year program because they need that internship. And so the discussion we had is, look, you'll be a great candidate for Ivy. You need more experience in this area, right? But if you want to do an MBA, within the next year or so, you got to do a two-year program. But you're a great MBA candidate. Just because we're turning you down has nothing to do with you doing well in the classroom. It's about making sure that you're coming in with that sort of depth of experience to do well. And depth isn't the amount of years, right? It's what you've done in that time frame. So yeah, so again, I know I've probably harped enough on it, but it comes down to that. And I think this about any program. If you had to leave with one thought that I would say is never ever self-select yourself out. And I think that's really, really important. And, the programs are here to kind of evaluate your fit as well. And I think that's an important aspect.
Thank you. And that's really an excellent advice to everybody, is really start connecting with the schools. And the same thing with the GMAT. If that's the same reason why we are interviewing every candidate who comes to our program. If you're not sure which of the programs is going to right for you, what's the right schedule, when you should be doing the GMAT, just connect with us. We're here to help you. And if you'd like to connect with JD, the best way is by email or by LinkedIn.
Yeah, either or is fine. Yeah, completely fine.
So tomorrow in the email, where we're going to send you these resources, if you have any individual questions for me or for JD, then you absolutely can send these questions personally. I know there's one more question that, I don't know, JD, if you want to take this question about the specializations, or if you would suggest that this person connects with you in person.
Yeah, I'll give you a quick thing about specializations, or, we have an MBA, no different than a lot of schools, right? So all the schools that you listed there, Sergey, when you listed the average scores, they don't graduate you in an MBA in finance, right? You don't get that in the piece of paper. Specialized programs for us, we have some specialized programs, some Masters of Management programs. They're really designed for individuals that want to, sometimes younger in their career, right? So sometimes you have to specialize to kind of get career traction. So a lot of specialized programs are pre-experienced programs where MBAs need some work experience. These are individuals that, are having trouble sort of launching their career right after their undergraduate program. What all programs do offer is elective courses. And so although you're not graduating an MBA in finance, I'll talk about Ivy, for instance, is we have, you have to take 9 elective courses and you go in the program, you can take up to 11, but you could choose to do all 9 in finance if you wanted to. I would say this about elective courses, and I just talked to our current class about choosing electives. When you look at the elective courses, is you're going to naturally choose things that you want to have a career afterwards. And we help you do that. So if you're looking to get into, a marketing role, there's some marketing courses you have to take. But you don't have to take all your courses in marketing. And one of the things I would say is you want to look at that and you want to say, here are some courses I want to take because I'm interested in them career-wise. But also look at courses where you go, I'm really interested in this. This is something really, really cool. and also where you might have some of those skill gaps in your career as you go forward. So I think as you choose specializations or electives, I think the broader you go, the better. And I think that's something important to keep in mind. Because your career is a long time. You know, you could start off in a finance role and move into something else. And we have tons of alumni. I mean, Sergey, look at your experience, right? Career is a long time. You can kind of shift things around. And so I think it's really important to keep that in mind. There's so much focus on that first job after your MBA. This is an investment in your career.
That's right. Absolutely. And again, thanks for sharing this. And just like you said, that decision, the one decision can completely change your life. So you probably have some decisions to make after this class. I hope that this is not, this wasn't just a quick drop-in session where I just want to learn a little bit about the GMAT. I hope that it leads to something bigger for you, that you will really take your career to the next level. So please connect with us. We are your resources. We are going to help you get to where you need to be. And if you're not quite sure yet what you want to do, connect with us too, and we're going to help you make these decisions. So that's probably what we can leave you with. If there's anything you want to say in as a wrap up, and I think we can probably end. And thank you so much again for staying here a little bit over time.
Yeah, I would only say never ever self-select yourself out. So keep that in your mind all the time. So.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, if you would like to connect with us, please look for that email tomorrow. We are going to include JD's contact information as well. There's going to be all of these resources that you can download. And please stay in touch, stay safe, and we'll hope to see you soon.